Everybody stop your talking. We're bringing this to order here.
Bringing this baby
Where's your gavel?
You should have more handout. If anybody doesn't have the bill, let me know. We have extra copies that we have on the desk. Last thing I covered, against my better judgment of wishes, Senate Caucus, which we can use your electronics.
Yoo-hoo!
Why did you tell them?
Because I know 3 or 4 people are going to. And I don't want to be asked to kind of clamp down on people with the caucus. When we start back up, Senator Person can come up front. We're already running the video, and we need Senator Person to come up.
And we're already running late because Lieutenant Governor Rogers wasn't starting the meeting. Do you want to stand here or? Okay, you come stand here then. I'm out of your way.
I might need them. Okay, welcome to the FY26 Caucus of the Whole. First question is, did you hear about the appropriations chairman that liked to collect magazines? Turned out he had a lot of issues. So you're going to hear about some of my issues. One of the issues was I didn't really know how to present this, that my predecessor did it in a very different way. So this is a trial. So let us know what you think of it, how we might be able to improve it in the future. So what I'm going to do in the caucus of the whole is go through these 4 handouts that you have in front of you, just explain what they are, give you some highlights to them that I think is important context. Then we'll have questions. It's good to do the questions in this format because I can more easily ask members of the committee that are the experts of those sections to respond. Or we have our JFO team here that has a lot of the answers. They have memorized every line of the budget so they can tell us where things are. Sometimes there's language in different sections of the appropriations. So we'll do that after I go through the handouts. And just as an explanation of the general budget process, you know this because you all sat through the governor's budget address. But the governor and the administration starts this process back in the early fall, in September, October. They're working with all the different agencies and departments on what their budget requests will be. They go through it with their whole team of analysts and decide what is the budget for the administration. And that they really do the heavy work that we rely on to build the vast majority of the budget. And then the House Appropriations Committee, which meets 5 days a week, they meet on Mondays, they meet all day, they don't go to the floor very often. They really dig through everything that the governor had presented, plus other testimony, and then they send it over to us. We obviously don't have as much time as either the administration or the House had, but we have more information because the year has progressed. So there's some examples I'll give to you where we had more money than the House or the governor had to work with. So that's the general process. So this highlight document, this 3-page highlight document, I won't go through all the highlights, but it's just to say there's a table at the top just to give you the big numbers. This is a over $9 billion budget when we add all the federal funds in, which is about 1/3 of the total dollars. So you get to some big numbers at the top. Some just kind of overview of some of those numbers. I think in the budget context, it's important to say that we did work with the administration officials, the governor's budget people. We were in contact with them weekly. They testified several times in the committee. We also worked with chairs and standing committees of the Senate on their priorities. We had members of the public at 2 public hearings to weigh in on budget priorities. We took testimony from almost all the state agencies and some specific issues we would hear more than once from state government. And that's how we built this $9.1 billion budget. So on this highlight sheet, after that kind of budget context, you'll see the highlights of base appropriations. Just to remind folks, the base appropriations are those that are just baked in. They're already part of the way just the government's running on a day-to-day basis. we, especially in the Senate, don't look at any of the base appropriations, because that's just government running as government runs. We're really just looking at what changes to the base are we going to make. And then in this highlight document that JFO prepared will give you those bullet points of some examples from different sections. So for example, on housing, we're fully funding the Vermont Conservation Board's statutory level of 36.9 million. This is if all the property transfer tax goes to VHCB. For many, many years, we've not withstood the legislative statutory requirement of how much goes to VHCB and taken that money for other priorities. This is one of the first years where the governor and the House and the Senate all agree on the full appropriation. But this is in here just as a highlight to point that out, even though it's not a change to the base. There's the $2 million for the MER program, which is a new program that will be moving to the base. There's the Land Access Opportunity Board. This 1.6 million isn't new money, but it's moving from one time to the base. And the last bullet point on that section, we are increasing the base. The HOP program, the Housing Opportunity Grant Program that works on homelessness, that had a base of 29.7. We're adding 3.35 million to that base in your government appropriations proposal. So those are some examples. Next section is human services and childcare items that we had. This includes a 2% increase on the next page, on page 2, this $5.1 million plus federal funds that would give a 2% rate increase for all our designated agencies. They're doing a lot of the work in our communities with mental health and homelessness and home health agencies provided across the state. There's several bullet points on healthcare that you'll probably hear about. There's in the other column, other section, there's things like we're setting aside money for the Pay Act. The Pay Act happens every 2 years, so it's not this year, but we don't want to try to come up with all the money in 1 year, so we're setting aside this $27.8 million for that happening next time. The next bullet point is something Governor and House agreed on, that we agreed, and that's that JTALK transfer that we talked about in the Transportation Fund. So this is another example of money that the general fund used to get from transportation that we're not getting this year. You'll see all the other ones here. Then down at the bottom of this page 2 is the one-time appropriations. So the one-time appropriations are those appropriations that we will look at every year. You could have a one-time appropriation that almost acts like a base, that you're just redoing it every year. But unlike the base, your appropriations committees and the administration are going to look more closely at those every year and change them or not do them. And an example of those, the emergency housing program, that's also called or referred to as the motel hotel program, that 30.5 million. Since COVID and since we started that program, we've been doing it as one time, but now we're on multiple years. There's a base funding of over $7 million for that program. The 30.5 million is on top of that for basically all the hotel rooms. That used to be a lot higher. I think it was close to $50 million at some point. So we have brought it down, but it's still in here as, I think, one of the largest one-time appropriation. The $2 million for the administration for shelter bed expansion is in there. That was another example of an ongoing base appropriation. The VHIP is in here. This was an example of where the governor wanted to move this to base. This is one of the times where he said the Senate had put too much in the base, but then he wanted us to put this in the base. You know, we did increase the base amount, and I'll go through that, but this is a program that we thought could stay in the one times and look at it and see how it goes with our old housing plan in the years to come. So we have healthcare and human services, higher education. In the other, I wanted to highlight the top 2 bullet points. There's the 77.2 million general fund that's going to be moved over to the education fund. It says for property tax relief, but it's really just going to the education fund. And then it'll be in the yield bill where your committee on finance will decide how that actually gets spent in the education fund. There's already something like $20 million in the education fund left over from last year that's there. So we're adding the 77.2 that could be used for tax relief this year or future years, but that'll be part of the yield bill. And then the $1 million for Agency of Education, this was an example of a change that the governor didn't have this in his budget because the education reform plan was being developed after the budget address. So this was something that the administration came to the Senate and said, can you put this, well, the House to ask for $4 million to the House. We put it in this $1 million every year for 4 years as they make the transformation. The third to the bottom, I wanted to highlight some of the items you'll see on the highlight sheet and in the whole bill is items that you would have seen in the Budget Adjustment Act. We passed 2 budget adjustments out of the Senate. In both of those, there was, or the first one, there was this $1.8 million for municipalities that suffered from the 24 floods, plus the Addison County towns that suffered in 23 floods but didn't get the money that we had appropriated the prior year. So there's things like that that are also in here that were really from the BAA. So that's the highlight sheet. So now I want to go to what we call the base appropriation sheet, and we call it that because that's what it's titled. And this is the one that has this purple box on the top. And the purple box on the top, and I want to remind folks that this is in millions of dollars, so 2,223 million, that's 2.2 billion. So I'll refer to it usually as the 2.2 billion numbers. So just to further point that out, on line 24, the K9 trainer, very popular item, that .04, that is $40,000, just to orient the numbers when we're talking about in millions. So at the top, you'll see at the very beginning, the FY26 base with the typical changes, and there's some information in the notes column. I'll just also point out the columns. You have the line numbers, which I'll refer to sometimes. The section numbers refer to the sections, not in the addendum, like we normally talk about sections, but in this handout, which is titled the web report. Those are the sections numbers. Of the department, the description, what the governor did, what the House did, difference the House from the governor, what the Senate is proposing, and how that differs from the House. And then in the notes column, by color, you'll see whether it's an action of the governor, the House in red, and the Senate proposal in blue. So right off the beginning in line 1, we're already at a $2.2 billion budget, just with kind of the base operations of government. Salary changes, just typical things that we're not really going to address. There's the other things I mentioned, like the Pay Act, obligations to the pension, things that we have to do right at the top, like debt service, transfer to the cash fund, obligations to the tax departments, computer modernization fund, that's another 100 million. So right there, it's $2.369 billion. And then there's 65 line items on the sheet that your committee is proposing, either changes from the governor and the House or agreeing with the governor and House. If it's all grayed out, then that means we're just agreeing. The changes you'll see different from the House, and if you want to see different from the Gov, you'll just have to go over and look at that. So I'll just point out some of the items on here. I think I should point out that, so at the bottom, if you go all the way on the other page to line 71, then you'll get the total of the appropriations we made, which is $98.82 million appropriations. And if you go to line 81, after the House bill that we're holding money for and some base changes, it's a $2.4 billion. And you can look over and see what the governor and House did. We were 25 million over the House, and the House was over the governor by 24 million. So you'd add those together, and you're $49 million over the governor's recommended in base spending, which seems like a lot of money. I think if I was the governor and the legislature proposed spending $50 million in base, I would also bring that up as a concern. But let me explain why we did that and why I don't think it's is as big of a deal as it seems when you just think of the number. And that is mainly that there's two items alone that equal almost $30 million. Of that 49, 30 million are two items. 7 items get you to 45 of the 49 million. So there's a lot of little things in here you'll see, like the canine trader for $40,000, or changes to adult education that's, $180,000. But let me go through these 7 items that really get us to almost all of the money that we're differing from the governor. So on line 9, there's $140 million for pre-charge diversions to the criminal justice centers. That was something that the governor didn't have. If you go down to line 31 and 32, these are the rate changes. There was some studies about what our DAs and the community-based providers are getting paid. This is trying to get them up to what the study said they should be getting paid, so they can keep employees, so they can do this important work in our communities. That's another over $7 million. And then a really big one is on line 43 and 44 together is $25 million, basically. So the governor had proposed to take $19 million out of the general fund for the CCFAP, the Child Care Financial Assistance Program. The House agreed. We said we're not going to take that money out of the general fund. So that is a $19 million difference. They reduced $19 million. We kept it even. And then we're spending some money we're taking that money, which you'll hear about later, from the Child Care Special Fund, which is funded through the payroll tax, instead of taking it from the general fund. And then the next item, 44, the CFAP rate increase, we're using some of the money, the excess money we have in the Child Care Fund to fund an increase for infants and toddlers at 5.5%. So that's almost $6 million. You add on the other sheet $1 million for the education transformation. That's on line 53. This is one that the governor didn't have in his budget and asked us to include. If you add all those together, those 6 items, that's $35 million about. And then you go to line 78, the emergency housing. This is a bill, H91. This is a bill started in the House, obviously. That's really looking at how we're operating our emergency housing program, the hotel motel program, and can we transition away from that $30 million base budget every year? So that's $10 million, so we saved that. So that gets you to $45 million. So of the $49 million that were different from the governor, those are 45, and I think in my mind, that shows that we're not like just spending crazy money everywhere. We are strategically making some changes, and a big chunk of that 25 million is in that childcare. 20 of it is really more about an accounting difference than a difference in spending. A couple other things I just want to point out on the priority sheet is line 8, the additional positions in the Attorney General's office. This was in the BAA, that was the first one that we passed. In particular, it helps the Attorney Generals with the pre-charge program, but it also creates a new position in the Solicitor General program that's going to help the AG's work on defending Vermont and Vermont funds, federal funds from the federal government overreach. This has happened already where states have sued the federal government and say, you can't take that money away. We have a contract, we have an agreement, and judges had remanded that money back to the states. But if you weren't one of the states that were participating in the lawsuit, you might not get that money. So this will provide us another position in the Solicitor General's office to focus on these federal lawsuits. And we're also extending the home repair fraud coordinator, which was an existing position that was ended when it was started. It had a time limit on it. This is $80,000 that we think is related to our housing crisis. This helps people that are getting home repairs, maybe an ADU unit that runs into a conflict with their contractor, to have somebody that's a contractor himself that can negotiate and has got Vermonters a lot of, several $100,000 back from fraudulent contractors.
Andy, can you just remind us where you are? I sort of lost you.
That was line 9
On the first page.
line 8
Right, okay, so, right, thanks.
on the base appropriations. So just another example, which you'll probably hear about later, line 21, the urban search and rescue. This is money that we move from one time. So the the governor nor the House recommended money in the base, but we're putting the money in the base instead of putting it in one time. We feel like it was important to actually have set money for the folks that do the urban search and rescues during the floods, if we're going to have more floods, which seems like we are, but they also do other search and rescue operations. We wanted to make sure they had the space, the training, and the equipment necessary to be able to save Vermonters' lives.
I'd like to say that with that team, they've been nationally recognized at how good they are, so.
Yeah, and they were just
Money
sent.
well spent.
Yeah, I agree. And they were just sent to Kentucky. And if they don't have the equipment and the training, it's more difficult for them to go to help other states. And that also makes it difficult for us to ask for help from other states when we need it. I think I already mentioned some of these other things when I went over the big total. In the line 50 on the other side, the Green Mountain Care Board, the GMCB, the governor had recommended 3 positions as part of trying to the expansion to the head model, which we don't know if we're going ahead with the head. This is going to depend on the federal government, but we have the money in there if we do. But also S-126 was looking at some transformation of our healthcare system. We have together with the housing crisis, we have a healthcare expense crisis. This will include positions to help with reference-based pricing, which we feel has a potential to help bring down costs, or at least bend the cost curve that we're suffering under on insurance and hospital costs. I already mentioned the educational transformation, $1 million. So as I said, that gets you down to the total amounts. Down in section 73 was an example where we found a little money. The stabilization reserve for next year has to be a little lower because we're actually spending a little less money. The stabilization reserve is 5% of prior year appropriations. We're spending a little less, so there was a little more money that we can take off of the stabilization reserve for next year. So we found $400,000 there. There's line 78, that 10 million for that bill. Don't know what's going to happen to that bill, but if the bill passes, we have $10 million set aside from that. Similar to that bill, we have some tax credits that are kind of still in play in the legislature down at the bottom, section lines 88 to 94. Above that, it shows you what were the revenue for the base. There's the forecast, it's $2.4 billion. That's the consensus forecast that we're building the budgets off. That's what we think we're going to raise in revenue in fiscal year 26. And then there's direct applications. That's money we're getting from like unclaimed property or Department of Federal Financial Regulation that kind of sends money from special funds to the general fund. The cannabis fund is an example of some other found money, if you want to call it that, where the governor thought the cannabis fund was going to send the general fund 5.9, but really it's going to be 8.9. So we had $3 million more than either the governor or the House had to spend. Down at the bottom, the $28.85 million, that's money that we can put towards the one-time expenses. So that's the base, and you can go ahead and stop me if you have any questions about the base. So that's the base sheet, and I was gonna go to this one-time sheet next. Yes,
Just a question.
yes, Senator Harris.
On page 1, line 13, the sheriff's transport deputies, is that for transporting between courts and prisons?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's some issues around this. We created the positions so they could hire them, and the $65,000 here is about vacancy savings. So we think they're going to have the money to be able to hire those deputies, and we created the deputy positions, but we didn't actually give them extra money to fund those positions.
How many positions is it?
This was 2 transport deputies, if I remember correctly.
Okay. Thank you.
Andy,
Yes.
line 40, the other infrastructure essential investment, 14 million. Between them two, actually, why is that so high?
Line 40?
Actually, I go 38, 39, 40. I understand the okay. I understand that one a bit, but why are we giving so much money to them, to those projects?
Which lines are you? 'Cause I'm-
We're in page,
This,
yes, the one time.
Ah, okay, the
Yes,
one time.
Sorry about that.
Okay, that's fine. I just, okay,
Yes.
let me. So one thing that this one, I'll answer your question, Senator Heffernan, but just so orienting to this chart, it doesn't have all the money you saw that $28 million that is listed as at the bottom of this. That's money we're moving over to one times. But in addition, there was $138 million carryover from fiscal year 24. Fiscal year 24 was a very good year financially for the revenues of the state. So that carry forward came in. So that's part of the money that's being spent in this sheet. And you see what the governor proposed for one time, with the House, with the Senate, and then the difference is just between the House and the Senate. Okay, so your line 30, what?
Well, I know 38 because part of that, but 39 and 40 and the PCB test, I just.
Yes.
Why are they so high? Did we get estimates of that, or did they just throw mud on the wall and say, hey, this is what we think we need?
Yeah, the governor recommended 9.5, and we agreed with that. This is based on schools that have already been tested positive for PCBs and the estimates that we got from the Department of Environmental Conservation of what they think the cost will be. I can't remember if they had estimates, but I think they were unprofessional estimates, kind of like the department estimating what a range. This $9.5 million will not cover all the money. But they said this will get us through, hopefully, the schools that we have tested now. So they gave us a list of the schools that had tested positive, and just based on the different rooms and construction types of the schools, how much they thought it might cost.
And Andy,
Yes.
could add in there, the governor recommended the amount that we are agreeing with. The House had recommended a reduction by 50% or so, but then we had a letter from House Education essentially rethinking that and saying that they thought the 9 million was the proper amount.
Yeah, and unfortunately, there's a lot more PCB remediation than this $9 million.
Coming down the pike.
Did you have another?
And then the next one, the higher number, the 14.
The drinking water revolving loan fund. So these are, we put this money in the budget, but it's created by the Drinking Water and Revolving Loan Fund Board. This is money that was created, I think it's all from a PTT surcharge several years ago under former Secretary Pierce. She created this program that we would put a little surcharge on the PTT to fund clean water, basically to help clean up Lake Champlain. So this is where that money comes from. There's a whole list of infrastructure projects that, from stormwater to wastewater, that the money goes to. But we're just agreeing with the number. And I don't think all the projects are listed. I can't remember now. Are they all the projects listed in the budget? All the clean water projects? Or do we just say we're giving the money to what the Clean Water Board decided to spend the money on?
And if they fall short of that number, does that come back into the budget?
Yeah, it'll get reverted back into the fund. In fact, there was a small reduction because they had kind of, just the way the cash flow is going. That fund is self-sustaining.
Thank you.
So as I said, because of the carry forward and some of those other changes, we had $7 million more than the governor had to work with and 3 more than the House. We had things like that $19 million child care special fund transfer, that $28 million from the base sheet. So we have made 100 million, 100.2 in one times that you'll see on these, whatever it is, 83 different items, or 80, 80, we didn't do on each sheet, some of these things we didn't agree to fund. But I'll point out the good thing about this sheet is that on the fund, it shows you other funds than the general fund. We have another one-time sheet that kind of looks like the base sheet, but it's really just focused on the general fund. So for example, on line 3, the municipal technical assistance, the $1 million. The governor did have $3 million from general funds. We said, well, that is a good program. There's some excess in the pilot funds, so we're proposing to take $1 million out of the pilot funds so we can keep the technical assistance program going. The governor had proposed pilot funds for the line 5, the municipal grand list stabilization. That's when if a municipality abates property or has a buyout because of flood, they're not going to get the tax revenue for that. This money will pay the town over 5 years the money that they would have gained or close to it from the taxes from that building. Because we've had issues where towns have not agreed to a buyout because they're like, we need that on our ground list. This will help those towns, at least for 5 years, to transition and be more supportive of those buyouts of those flood damaged homes. You'll see the urban search and rescue on here. The community radio stations, this was in a bill, but we put it in here that goes to public safety, thinking about when you're in a real severe disaster, sometimes cell phone coverage doesn't work, power's outage, but if you can get to a radio, and the community radio stations are kind of meeting some rural parts of the state, and the proposal is that the fund, these $150,000 would be to 7 community radio stations to support their work, which I think not only was helpful in emergencies, but also just as local information and local news, local information that municipalities can have. We did some workforce stuff like the serve, earn, and learn on line 17 that the governor and the House didn't do, but we thought had been important work and has shown to be a really successful program, so we added $500,000 there. We did a bunch of stuff in the substance misuse prevention fund dollars in line 20, 21, 22 that the governor hadn't done. Line 23, this was money from the tobacco fund for smoking cessation, specifically for pregnant women. So the parent-child centers, which we feel has a much, close relationship with the mothers. They're in people's homes. They're working them more on a daily basis. We thought they would have more success. Vermont has one of the highest rates of pregnant women smoking, and we wanted to see some extra effort on that effort. So that's why we did that $500,000 from the tobacco fund. We spent more money than the House or the governor on food programs. There's one here that's DCF for the local food shelves, but you'll see on the other page under the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, the NOFA, the Crop Cash Plus, the Vermonters Feeding Vermonters, the Farm to School grants, things like that we thought were important that we make sure Vermonters do not go hungry. You'll see the PCV remediation money in here, the some money for tuition at CCV and state colleges. Some people are very excited to see number 36, they like Champlain International Fishing Derby for $30,000 that the governor or the House did not put in. There I talked about the food items, the home share program, and 64 and 65 supporting our elders in their housing needs. There's 2 transportation fund items in here, line 70, 71, that you would know about from the transportation budget. And then there's at the very bottom, line 83, is the money that we moved over to the cash fund to the capital investments. And so at the end, the difference between the governor was just over $1 million and close to $2 million difference from the House. So that's what these are all the one-time expenses. The highlight sheet has some of them as a highlight sheet, but they're all in that thing. So the other document I want to go over is this web report. I don't know if we would do this every year, but I thought it was good, especially if we have a lot of new senators, to see all the expenditures of the entire government. So any part of state government is in here. And so you can look it up here. Let me just run through some of the, well, the sections kind of speak for themselves. This is what we're going to go through when we have our actual budget report. So the different members of the committee had different sections of government. If there is a change, they're going to mention the change. But if there isn't a change between the governor's recommend and the House recommend, then we're not going to mention it because there's hundreds of pages in here. But this is, I think, a helpful reference document that you can store in your desk. So I'm not going to go over my sections now. I'll do that when we present the budget. So the other thing I wanted just to point out is the addendum, the actual bill. There's on page 3 of the addendum, gives you sort of a table of contents of what's in the budget, the sections in section A. So section A is mostly boilerplate language, the definitions, kind of what this is doing, how we're going to deal with federal funds, how we're going to deal with the end of year money. And then it gets into the B sections. The B sections are all the base expenditures until you get to B 1,100. When you get past the 1,100s or the 1,100, then you get into the one times. Section C is changes to this fiscal year. So section C is often a very small section, but since we didn't publish a budget adjustment act this year, section C and section F are sections that were come from the budget adjustment acts. So they're all adjusting fiscal year 25. In section D are transfers and reversions. Section E is all of the language. So you'll see in the beginning of the addendum, there's just page after page of just numbers. But a lot of those numbers, some of them, like let's say the tobacco funds, there's a specific language that refers to making sure that $500,000 goes to the parent-child centers to spend it. So you need language that matches up. So often if you see something in the B100s, like fire safety B12, if there was language about that, it would be around E212. So you could find it in there. There's language in here about how we're going to close out the fiscal year and how we're dealing with the cash fund. In section E in the language changes, there's the language about how we're going to postpone some of the base appropriations till November to see what the federal situation is going to be. Section F, as I said, was other BAA language that's in here. And then section G is the effective dates, which is a very interesting effective date section compared to other effective date sections. So that is my run through of the handouts that you have. I thought the other thing I just wanted to say is there was a discussion about how careful do we be given the uncertainty of the federal situation. We don't know if the federal government is going to run the economy off a cliff or we're just going to get stuck in a snowbank. I think this budget is more based on the snowbank scenario that we could get ourselves out of. We do have this money that we're not appropriating till November. Any money that does at the end of year construct that's left, okay, I see you, but let me finish this point. That we have where normally we would say like any excess money at the end of the fiscal year, we would create a contingency list, or some people call it a waterfall. Here are things that we couldn't put in the budget, but we want to spend money on. If there's money, we can spend it on that. We're reserving almost all of that, $45 million, for just contingency on the federal fund. So we're not spending that. So we're being careful, I think, about the situation, but it's very difficult to predict something so unpredictable. I think if we were having all of our economists saying we're going to be in a recession, you better prepare, we would have done it differently. But since there's so much uncertainty about the federal situation, we didn't really feel like they had enough information to make more changes than we already did. Senator Vyhovsky.
I have a couple of
questions, and one of them is related to the pensions. It looks like the municipal teachers and state pensions, the House advised a payment that the Senate removed, and I'm just trying to understand why. I want to make sure we're not underfunding our pension system again.
Are you seeing that in the web report?
I am, and the one I'm looking at, and it does it for every single system, but the
Yeah.
teacher's pension is represented on page 52.
Yes.
And I can find the other two. I
Yeah,
can mark
there's-
them as well.
Yeah, the teacher one is there and the other ones are earlier. I had asked about that. What that was VPIC, which is the Pension Investment Council Committee, Investment Commission, had made a proposal to the governor in the House. The governor declined. The House agreed with the VPIC, saying that the VPIC staff should be paid more. And they were saying that they don't need, the money to run VPIC comes from the pension funds, because they're running the pension funds. This is the staff that decides how the pension funds are invested and just manages the funds. They were going to take the money out of the pension funds for that extra $250,000, if I remember correctly. So they wanted to take $250,000 to increase pay, and they were taking, I think if you add the three up, you get to 250,000.
Okay, because I see that 250,000 represented on page, hold on, I don't actually know what page that is, on page
Yeah.
13 under the VPIC.
Right, so that's like, we're moving 250 to VPIC, but we're taking 250 in three parts from the three pensions
Okay.
to get the 250. But we heard the VPIC's concern about the level of pay, but your Committee on Appropriations did not. We agreed with the governor on that one.
Okay, and then my other question is if you can highlight a little bit more how the 2% increase was reached for our designated agencies, SSAs, TBI providers. And the reason I ask is because 2% doesn't even seem like it's in line with inflation, and these are critical systems that have been underfunded for 50 plus years. So I'm just a little curious how we arrived at that number.
Well, I know part of it was based on that rate study from a prior year. I think also it's what the House had done. So we did kind of take the lead from that, but I don't know if anybody else that was Senator Westman or Senator Lyons have anything else to say about that 2% for the DAs, that increase, I know that they did get rate increases last year, but we're still trying to catch up to where they should be.
Catch up to 23, 24, and 25 inflationary costs. So it'll be a gradual increase for those folks. And that's for one part of there are other rate increases that are also attempting to do the same for home and community-based services and community-based services.
I guess my question is, though, is how we're ever going to get them to where they need to be if we're not even giving them a rate increase in line with today's inflation?
Well, it's a catch-up. It really is a catch-up.
I mean, I think they got an 8% last year, which was trying to match the inflation. Hopefully, inflation won't be that high this year, but I get your point. I think it was what the House had did, and with all the other pressures, that's just kind of where we ended up. There is a language in the budget, or is it in one of the other bills, about looking at the rates again, doing redoing the rate study. It's in the budget.
Rate analysis.
Yeah, doing a rate analysis and then it also requires the administration to give us that number to say, we did the rate analysis every year and say, this is what the rate should be to reach that rate analysis recommendation. So going forward, we'll know how far off we are on a yearly basis, kind of like the reach up number that they give us.
Okay. And then did I hear you correctly that you did not fund additional transport deputies?
We did not fund the deputies. We funded 650,000 of this vacancy savings. So they have a vacancy savings of 0. We assume they're going to have some vacancy savings. The positions are there, so they could use the vacancy savings to hire that position. That wasn't really satisfactory to them, I will admit. But that's kind of where we ended up with that.
Was there any analysis done as to what that costs the system? Because now people are potentially sitting incarcerated longer because of court backlogs. Was there any testimony taken as to the cost to the system of not properly funding that sort of judiciary criminal legal system to get the backlogs down?
I don't remember testimony that gave us a dollar figure, but definitely we took testimony of saying the need and that it does cause cost. And this is something that I know Senator Norris and I agree that going into the conference committee, if there's a way to find that money, instead of just saying that they get out of the vacancy savings, something that we would be open to.
And then my last question is, I didn't see any line item for additional support to the Human Rights Commission. Was that taken out as well?
No, there's 2 positions for the
Okay,
Human Rights
great.
Commission.
So I just missed it. Great, thanks.
Any other questions, comments, jokes?
And folks will have another chance, obviously, when we gavel in to ask questions if they come to you.
But thank you, Appropriations Committee.